We begin on the eve of what would have been the most watched horse race in decades, but I'll Have Another has been scratched from the Belmont Stakes due to a leg injury. So this Saturday is back to what we thought it was about all along, 150 days to the presidential election. And with a press conference today, the president may have finally realized who his real opponent is.
Last September, I sent Congress a detailed jobs plan full of the kind of bipartisan ideas that would have put more Americans back to work. If Congress had passed it in full, we'd be on track to have 1 million more Americans working this year. The unemployment rate would be lower. Our economy would be stronger. Of course, Congress refused.
And while the first rule of Fight Club is don't talk about Fight Club, the first rule of Congress is do talk about jobs all the time, just don't do anything to help create them.
Listen, the American people are still asking the question, where are the jobs?
Stop engaging in the blame game. It is not because of House Republicans.
Let's extend the tax rates, let's stop the regulatory onslaught, and let's deal with our debt. Then we'll give job creators in America the freedom to go out there and to create the jobs that they want to create.
Right. So the store manager at Target would surely hire another checker if not for the national debt. The factory would hire another hand online if only they could emit unchecked pollution into the air. Mitt Romney could hire another landscaper for one or even several of his homes if only he knew that his taxes wouldn't go up. It makes perfect sense, doesn't it? And Romney today sounded a similar theme, albeit even more vapid, mocking the president's to-do list.
I got a copy here of his to-do list from his desk, you see. I was able to sneak that out, and there are a few things that are missing. Missing is lead a real recovery. Missing is reduce the deficit. Missing is save Medicare and Social Security. I won't have to have a long to-do list in my drawer at the White House. My to-do list is written on my heart, and the first 3 entries are these: jobs, jobs, and jobs.
You know, it's possible Romney can actually write on his heart because it is made, after all, of Etch-a-Sketch. Let's bring in our panel now. In Washington, Democratic strategist Julian Epstein of the Law Media Group. With me here in New York, MSNBC political analyst Michael Eric Dyson, a professor at Georgetown University, and MSNBC contributor Steve Kornacki, senior writer for TheSalon.com. Steve, just explain something to me. Republicans say the president is blaming the Congress, OK? So the president goes to the Congress with a Jobs Act. He then agrees to break it down into selective parts, and he says to them, here it is, and they oppose it. But it's his fault.
Because he's not a strong leader. I think that's
right.
I think that's the conclusion they want people to do. What the Romney strategy in this really boils down to is that people are going to ignore context. They're going to ignore or not be aware of or not care about the context that you just laid out.
You mean the facts?
They are going to look at the unemployment rate. They're going to say this is higher than it should be. I'm feeling more anxious than I should be. I've been out of work longer than I should be. My wife has been out of work longer than she should be. They're going to say that, and their instinct is going to be to fire the guy who's in charge. So the sole mission of Romney as a candidate, and you see it in the soundbite there, is basically to throw out every possible rationalization that he can think of. So the voter who's in that mood can latch on to something that will justify voting President Obama out. It's sort of the age-old strategy that a challenger will use, against an incumbent during times of economic trouble. But it's really been taken to an absurd extreme here, I think, by Romney.
It has. Professor Dyson, Republicans are now pouncing on the president for saying that the private sector is doing well. He's not worried about the private sector. But wasn't the longer point he was making that the private sector is creating jobs, but because of Republican opposition in the Congress, he can't do anything in terms of local and state government in job creation?
That's exactly right. Look at the Scott Walker referendum that some people have taken now as a victory for the Republicans, but the narrow victory again suggests that these public officials who are in control, who are Republican, are devastating local economies. Look, the president has added 847,000 jobs this year in the private sector. That means about 169,000 per month, which means it keeps it right above the 150,000 level to keep unemployment rising, though it's stalled in the last, or slowed down in the last 2 months to 90,000. Now, what he's saying, relatively speaking, they're doing all right by comparison. But the public sector has lost 23,000 jobs this year because Boehner and Cantor and McConnell, et cetera, are standing as obstructionists to the very job creation that the president has put forth that would help stimulate the economy. They're just hypocrites.
Right. Julian, Norm Ornstein Epstein, and Thomas Mann's book, It's Even Worse Than It Looks, describes the current Congress as dysfunction driven by tribalism. We've had countless congressmen saying that this Congress is really something very different from the past. How do Boehner and Cantor justify their absolute opposition to everything, given that we've been through the worst economic crisis in 60 years? And if ever there was a time to do something, it's now.
Yeah, you know, as you know, Martin, I ran 2 different congressional committees up there, and I never saw Republicans as being this obstructionist before. This is like the arsonists blaming the fire on the fire brigade and just sitting back on their hands, hoping that they'll collect the insurance money at the next election time. I mean, the level of irresponsibility is just amazing. You know, we've talked about the data before in this show. We've had about 1 million private sector jobs created this year, about 4 million since the Obama recovery has started working. We've gone from -9 GDP to +2. It's an 11-point positive swing. I mean, if there's any criticism of the Obama recovery, it's that he tried to fill a $2.5 trillion hole in the economy with a $750 billion stimulus plan. But we've seen the evidence that it's working, notwithstanding the Republican obstructionism. And you go and you ask the Republicans what they want to do, and they say, we want to cut taxes. And as I've said before, taxes are lower than they ever have been in this country for everybody. You ask them about the deficit, and the numbers don't add up on the deficit. They've never been clear about how they want to go after Medicaid and Medicare. So there just is no alternative plan out there other than to say this guy is bad. And that's the long and short of what Republicans stand for today. And it didn't used to be this way. No. You know, Republicans really used to stand for something. I disagreed with them in the past.
Yes.
But it didn't used to be that they just stood for nothing. No. Today they just stand for nothing.
Dysfunctionalism driven by tribalism. Steve, we're watching the president now with the New York Giants, the Super Bowl victors, of course. And he himself was pretty aggressive earlier today when he spoke out about this suggestion that his administration has been leaking information for his own benefit. Take a listen.
The notion that my White House would purposely release classified national security information is offensive. We're dealing with issues that can touch on the safety and security of the American people, our families, or our military personnel, or our allies. And so we don't play with that.
Professor Dyson says that is the president extremely angry because he's a very measured man on all occasions. But he absolutely refutes the suggestion that he would do such a thing, doesn't he?
Yeah, no, and I get the sense that on this one, too, the Republicans who have been speaking out and have been suggesting that this was sort of a coordinated, effort on the Obama administration's part to get this portrayal of Obama out into the media of sort of the tough guy on national security. I think those suggestions have really kind of gotten under his skin. I think you probably saw that there. And I think this is one of those issues, too, where, again, he can't be seen as being anything but angry about something like this.